Hi, I'm Mehul Harry, and today we're going to take a look at the ASPxPivotGrid. Before we do, let's first take a look at what an ASPxPivotGrid looks like and a quick demo of it. The ASPxPivotGrid is a great way to organize, summarize, and analyze your business data. So you can show off some great reports, like if you have customer reports that display information about the customer, the product amount, name, as well as year and quarter of the sales. So we can set up a report that shows here that the customers and what year and quarters that the sales were made, as well as grand totals for the columns and rows. You can also provide information such as what were the top 10 customers based on the product, the unit sales per year, or what were the top 2 products. So if I wanted to show off what year these products were actually sold, I can drag a column if I was the end user and quickly display that without having to rely on any updates from the developers. But what exactly is a pivot table or a crosstab? So let's take a look at the Wikipedia entry that has a really good explanation. A pivot table is actually first created in spreadsheets, and it's a data summarization tool in a lot of programs like Excel and so forth. And their pivot tables are great for quickly creating crosstabs. Now, a crosstab is basically displays the joint distribution of 2 more variables. What that means is, let's say if we had the wiki users and if we had some things like boxers and briefs, what is the joint distribution of these 2 variables? So we can see, well, a person who uses Wikipedia a lot may wear boxers versus a non-Wikipedia user will probably wear briefs, just as a generalization of what a crosstab may look like. And a pivot table lets us quickly make these type of crosstabs. So let's say if we had a pivot table that displayed region, gender, style, ship date, and some other information such as unit, price, and cost. Well, we can see that region will repeat quite a bit, as well as ship date. And we wanted to get, let's say, some crosstabs of certain information based on this table. Well, you know, a pivot table can give us the depth of we want, but you know, it can be very broad, as you can kind of tell from the table, because we have a lot of options. So a better question is, as it states here, is what are you looking for? What am I looking for if you were the end user? If you have a question that says how many units did we sell in each region for every ship date, then we can set up a crosstab that shows the region as well as the ship date, and then we can get the grand totals for this. And the ASPxPivotGrid lets you do just that very easily. So here we're taking a look at the top 2 products by customer, and the product amount is used as the data summarization. So now that we saw what an ASPxPivotGrid looks like and a quick demo of it, why use an ASPxPivotGrid? What are the benefits? Well, an ASPxPivotGrid lets you and your end users quickly summarize, organize, and filter data across multiple columns that you normally can't do with a 2-dimensional grid. And the other reason is that as a developer, if you try to program that SQL for that pivot table yourself, you'll be writing a lot of SQL. And the pivot grid does all that work for you. So how hard is it to use our ASPxPivotGrid? Do you need to bind any code? Do you need to write any extra special code or any extra SQL? Not really, not with the ASPxPivotGrid. The ASPxPivotGrid really is as simple as dropping onto the form and data binding it. And today we're going to take a look at doing just that. We're going to use the invoices view from the Northwind database to data bind to the ASPxPivotGrid, and then we're just going to take a look at its runtime features that let you sort and also explain some of the filter area, such as the row area, column area, data area, and the filter header area, and what you can do by moving the columns around as well as filtering, sorting. So let's take a look. Let's start with a blank project. The only thing I've done so far is added the Northwind Access Data Source and a default ASPX page. Open the default ASPX page and go to the Design view, and we'll add an Access Data Source and configure it to use our Northwind database. We're going to use the Invoices view. The Invoices view pulls in data from a bunch of tables like the shippers, customers, orders, and we're going to pull in the fields city, country, product name, unit price, and quantity. Let's test our query. And now let's drop an ASPxPivotGrid onto the form. and we'll data bind it to our Access data source. Click on the fields to retrieve the fields that we have stored in our Access data source, and we can see here city, country, product name, and unit price. Now, one of the first things you'll want to do is define where these fields will be laid out. Initially, they're all going to be set in the filter area, but before I explain where we want to drop these fields into, let's go take a look at the areas first. The first thing we'll notice is that here we have the filter area. The filter area displays the filter field, which allows end users to apply filtering to the entire pivot grid control to display data for the predefined values. The next, we have the data header area. In this area is where we're going to put our data fields. Now, these are the fields against which summaries are calculated. The summary results are displayed within this area here. As you can see, grand totals are calculated for us automatically on these summaries. Then we have the row header area here. This area displays the row fields. The values of these fields are listed along the control's left edge, and they represent row headers. And finally, here we have the column header area. This area displays column fields, and the values of these fields are listed along the control's top edge, and they represent basically column headers. So now that we know all the areas, we can see that initially all the fields that are retrieved are put in the fields area. Let's define what fields we want initially shown and what summaries to be calculated. Click on the Smart tag again and click Fields. Click City, and we'll change City from filter area to the row area, as well as country. So this defines the rows that we'll see for the city and the country. And it'll become a little more clear once we've actually defined all the fields. We'll change product name to be shown into the column area. And finally, unit price will be shown in the data area. We're also going to show quantity in the data area. Now, this is the area that we'll actually see the summaries being calculated for these two fields. Now, all we have to do is click Run to see our ASPxPivotGrid in action. So here we can see we have the product name up along the column area. Here's the city and the country. Now, one of the first thing I notice is that city is displayed. I'd rather have country shown here. So let's drag it and drop it here. So as you can see, you can easily move around the data fields. Now we see we've got grouping by country for the individual cities. So we can collapse these as well. Now, rather than collapse them one by one, I can also right click here and select collapse all. So now I see nothing but the countries, and if I want to see individual cities for Argentina, I can just click on Argentina as well as get data. Now there's only one city there, so let's pick a country that has more than one city shown in there. So here we can see for Berlin, the city of Aachen doesn't have any data, so we don't see it there. Now, one of the other things I notice is along the top, there's a lot of products displayed. I don't necessarily want to see all the products, so I can apply filtering as an end user. So I can just select the filter drop down, deselect show all, and just select the products that I'm interested in. Now, say I want to filter by unit price. Now, as you see, as soon as we move unit price out of the data fields, we're only left with a quantity. Now, you can easily see where items will be dropped onto. When you drag and drop, you'll see these arrows come up. These arrows let you see where the item will be inserted. So this time I'll put unit price before quantity. And finally, don't forget that sorting is also supported. By clicking on the country field, I've now sorted alphabetically in descending order. And I'll change it back to ascending order. And as you can see, we have grand totals for all the columns as well as the rows. So we can see this in a multiple dimension that you wouldn't normally see in a grid view. So in this video, we saw what a pivot grid looks like, a quick demo of it, as well as what a pivot table and a cross tabulation is. And I recommend checking out the Wikipedia articles on those to learn more about exactly what a pivot table looks like. But in general, you can see the benefit of using ASPxPivotGrid to show this cross-tabular information that the end users can manipulate themselves without you actually having to write any of that queries. And let's say if you wanted to export that pivot grid, you can do this using the exporting feature of the ASPxPivotGrid to a PDF or an Excel file, and you can take a look at this on the online demos of the ASPxPivotGrid. So, thanks for watching.